Hello, Kirihara here of TKM with the ongoing series about how we can improve education. So today we'd like to talk a little bit more about the technique, the style that I've been introducing to you called direct instruction. The theory of direct instruction is designed in such a fashion that it works on the idea that there are three things that affect learning. The learner itself, we are what we are. The other one is the material, how it's built, and how it's delivered. So with that idea in mind, let's discuss the two foundational skills that are crucial to our well-being that come out of school first. Language and mathematics, which are primarily taught first, second, and third grade in the schools. They introduce the idea in first, then expand it into the second, and then into the third. By the time you leave third grade, you should be able to decode and encode simple language and words. Now, exactly what does that mean? It means that we are born to talk. We're born to develop our oral language. Of course, most of us start babbling, and then by the time we're 2, we have that language intact. And our parents usually work on it with us, and then we help them. We give kids ideas about print because we point at letters that start their name, like Miss K. They point at a K, and they say that's the letter, and it makes the sound K. So that's phonics. And phonics is the access key to be able to get into our phonetic language, which we in fact created in our civilization probably 10 or 15,000 years ago when we had left hunting gathering, little tiny villages, towns, and now we were into bigger communities, and we needed to be able to record things so that I was able to tell what was happening today, talk about yesterday, and maybe tomorrow. Transitions of time are something that don't work very well without the written language. The other important thing is remembering that since we wrote the language down, first we created the pictures and then they became the letters, the symbols. That means that you are encoding. You're putting it in a code, and the code then can be lifted out of it when you decode, when you sound out the words and say it fast enough to match what exists in your head, in your auditory vocabulary. Kids who come to school with 300 to 500 words and parents who talk to them about text in some way have a form of readiness that will allow them to learn much easier than children who do not come to school having had that experience. Perhaps they've just been handed electronics. That doesn't engage your brain in the same way. It doesn't leave a trail called an engram that is going to be a way that you go back and path it. I mean, when you write on a piece of paper, you leave a print, and that's how you can go back and retrieve it. When you write on your brain, you put something in there and you can work it out through practice. Practice, practice, practice. Children need to be given opportunities again and again and again to practice what they're trying to learn. So, what can parents do? Parents can read to their children when they're in vitro, in the womb. There's a lot of research out there that shows that makes a difference. They can also start talking to them as soon as they're born, because our bodies are designed to finish forming themselves after we slide out over the next 2 to 3 years. The first year, we develop our hand and foot movement, we develop our eye movement, we are able to start crawling, which gives us depth perception because binocular vision occurs, which means that children aren't going to be ready to really be readers in the sense of using their eyes until they're closer to 3. So between 2, when you formed language, and 3, you can begin to do that process. As a matter of fact, there's actually a book that I sat next to the author, have a signed copy. It's called Teach Your Child How to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. And it's designed for parents to be able to take that 3-year-old child and get it to where it needs to be, finish first grade before you even start school. Can you imagine how you would be able to move through the ranks if you can accelerate your learning in that fashion? Now, mathematics is the same way. It's also a developmental subject, meaning it has a beginning that has to be in place before you move on. And of course, mathematics in the lower schools is putting a number together and taking a number apart. We call it addition and subtraction. By third grade, we've usually decided that we can be real efficient and we can take the same number apart and put the same number together. We call that multiplication and division, which is just a faster way of doing the same thing. But if students aren't taught the number value, the placement, the numeration, and the needed concepts for readiness, then they're not going to do as well when we move in. The combination is that if you work on your language and you work on your math skills, then you're going to be able to do word problems, which is kind of what we're aiming for. It's sort of what it's all about. But those two need to be built together instead of compartmentalized. Unfortunately, schools today have not been training teachers in the same way they did up until 1975, when we had those primary elementary teachers that knew exactly what young children who are still forming their eyes and their hands and ability to read and write need. That's why we used to, when we were in kindergarten, we were given those papers with the big lines and the big pencils, and you were taught to start on one side and touch the pencil and then go between the lines and complete lines so that you learned your letters and saying them at the same time. Some things don't have to be reinvented. Unfortunately, that one was, and so perhaps if we were to convince people to go back to training educators in the way that they know how to do things, that would be even better. Lots of research coming out now about brain biology and what it takes to make it work. They even are able to, because of the current ability to look inside the brain with scans and images, to see what is happening in certain areas at certain times. We also know there was a guy named Epstein, and he was a theorist on brain growth development. We know that kids grow at different phases. Remember the brain growth where they just growing things where they just grew out of the pants and you had to go get a new one? Well, the same thing happens in the brain. So if teaching is lined up, education is lined up with that, then it works a lot better, because you know when they're learning new and novel things, you can put that in, and yet when they're teenagers and their bodies are conditioning to become adults and getting replumbed, as it were, better be better, because if we would give them things that they're missing, because at that time they don't have a brain growth, and it's not a good idea to not teach the way the body develops. So developmental person, developmental subjects put together in an order that allows things to smoothly run in and reinforce, is what's happening. My direct instruction was designed in the 60s, entering a competition because at that time they saw that reading was going down and not everybody was learning, so the government put money out, and this was one of the ones that accepted the money and ran with it. Direct instruction was built by Dr. Douglas Carnine, a brilliant cognitive psychologist, and Dr. Zig Engelman, who was a German engineer, and their system is designed based on a method called ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. So you take apart things, you analyze them, and then you put them back together in a fashion that works. So if you want to teach a big subject, then you're going to start by analyzing that subject, getting the scope of it, seeing what are the steps to it, and then dropping back down and creating the sequence that would lead to that scope. And at each step of the way, you have something they're working on, maybe a picture of a flower. You want to see if they know all the parts to it. Then you assign that, they perform the task, you divide that into the 3 piles. Which one is the tallest is going to tell you if you hit your message or not. If the middle pile is the highest one, then that means everybody met the criteria, and so they probably have that knowledge. If the far right one is in place and it's the biggest, that means that they probably, it's a little too easy, because it doesn't, the way the bell curve works, there's usually a distribution. Or if the left-hand side is too big, then that means the lesson was too hard, which gives you a really lovely way to analyze on a regular basis what's happening in your classroom with regard to the material that you're teaching them. Aside from that, then it's a matter of layering the pieces together and determining if they have the prerequisites then to move to the next level. And the next time when we meet and we talk, we're going to talk some more about how you can structure your classroom, because if they look at things and if they listen to things, then that means everything that you scatter around, everything that you have going is giving input to your learner. And you can find out if that's happening the way you want by doing these assessments that we talked about. Hopefully this has been useful and helpful. We're going to put a bibliography out at some point that's going to list all the books that I've used that have been useful in developing this system and understanding how to be an effective teacher. Thank you.